everyone. Welcome to the webinar. Thank you for joining us. My name is Ashley King, and I'm part of the customer success team here at Tax 990. We are an IRS authorized e-file provider that helps nonprofits easily and securely file their Form 990 returns online. Our platform is designed to simplify the filing process, save organizations time, and help them stay compliant with IRS requirements. Today, we're excited to kick off a new series with the first session, Optimizing the Most Visible Sections of Form 990 for Fundraising and PR. This is the first of two webinars designed to help nonprofits optimize key sections of the Form 990 to build trust and support year-round fundraising and communication efforts. I'm also excited to introduce today's presenter, Melissa Leroy. She holds degrees in entrepreneurship and nonprofit management from Duke University, teaches nonprofit management classes, and consults through her firm, On Fire Nonprofit Consulting. Melissa, the floor is yours.
Thank you so much. I appreciate that, Ashley. Hi, everyone. Thank you again, Ashley, for that wonderful introduction and for the whole 990 Tax 990 team for having me here with all of you today. I personally have been using Tax 990 for years and reference it in a lot of presentations on podcasts that I'm on as well. So I'm very familiar with the product, and again, very honored to be here with all of you. And thank you to all of you for taking the time to spend with us today. So just a little bit more about me, everyone, as we kind of dive into today's webinar. I have been teaching nonprofit management since 2005. This course, actually, interestingly enough, how this came to be was this was a small little subset of a financial management course that I teach for Duke University in their nonprofit management program. However, I have been looking at and proofing 990s since the 90s when I was in corporate America and working for a Fortune 500 company, giving money to nonprofit organizations. And from that, I've just basically been on this one woman kind of mission, so to speak, to really talk to nonprofit organizations about the importance of 990 and how this can really help enhance the fundraising for your organization. And sometimes when we don't pay enough attention to the 990, it can hurt our sustainability cause and fundraising for the organization. So really talking to CPAs, accountants, CMAs, nonprofit leaders, just regular bookkeepers as well, to talk about the importance of why the 990 should not be looked at and viewed just as a tax document. Because this is what I have found in the past, is that it's commonly viewed as our tax document, we've got to get it filed, and then we really don't pay that much attention to it from that point on. So really trying to create this paradigm shift in the nonprofit sector where the 990 is looked at throughout the year in the certain sections that we're going to be going over in today's presentation as well. So you'll find out very, very quickly, everyone, just how passionate I am about the nonprofit sector. I just stated a moment ago, I started my career in corporate America with a Fortune 500 company, and in 1999 transitioned into the nonprofit sector and space where I have been ever since. And then in 2005 started with teaching and then also presenting at conferences to help nonprofit leaders across the country. My passion, of course, is finance and fundraising. My motto is, without funds, there's no financial management. So it kind of goes hand in hand when we talk about fundraising. When we talk about public transparency, public, also the trust, right? So we have to build that trust with the public as well to get then additional funds for our nonprofit organizations. And since I've been proofing 990s since the 90s, unfortunately, I have found very few 990s that I believe are donor funder worthy, that they really represent the transparency and the public trust and also that really scream or tout the organization that they are being run in a well-governed manner. And so again, that's one of the reasons why I've kind of been on this mission and have taken that little part of the financial management course of walking through and talking about a 990 and how that can be used for that fundraising and PR aspect, and have started doing webinars and just little mini courses like what you are going to see today in today's presentation. So currently we have 5 different 990 filings in this country. So hopefully some of you are familiar with the 990. That's kind of why you're here today. I want to just talk briefly about, of course, some of these. If you are a nonprofit organization, a small nonprofit organization, or you're just getting started, typically you're kind of looking at that 990N e-postcard. If you are on today's presentation, if you filed one of these, it's a simple, now it's I think up to 7 questions you have to answer and simply file that postcard. I would encourage you, though, if you are getting close to that $50,000 threshold, if you are looking at scaling the nonprofit organization, if you are looking at applying for foundation funding, go ahead and jump up to that 990 EZ level. It's going to be just a little extra work, very much worth it in the long run, particularly with donors and funders, because what we are seeing right now, everyone in this country, particularly with one of the largest charity watchdog groups that we have, which is Charity Navigator, they have done such a great job of marketing and advertising their donor checklists. So you can jump on Charity Navigator, and I'll talk about Charity Navigator in just a few moments as well, kind of some of the statistics that they're touting as well for their site. Many donors now, that's exactly what they do, is they jump on Charity Navigator to look at the donor checklist to get those questions. So Charity Navigator, since 2020 actually, has pushed this whole marketing and advertising theme out and plan, and they've done such an excellent job. And their whole basis is if you are an existing donor of a nonprofit organization, or this is your first time donating to this nonprofit organization, here's some things you need to look at. Here are some questions that you need to ask this nonprofit organization in order to discern whether or not this is a well-governed organization. The one thing that I think Charity Navigator has not done such a good job at doing is educating the public in that not every nonprofit organization has to file a long form 990, that there are others such as the 990 EZ and or the 990N e-postcard. So what I find when I go and present to the general population, not necessarily CPAs, CMAs, accountants, or nonprofit leaders, is the general public doesn't understand this. So when they jump on either candid.org or Charity Navigator and they're trying to look up maybe 2 nonprofit organizations in their communities, they can find one, and maybe that's because they're over, right, that $50,000 threshold. They're no longer filing that 990N e-postcard. However, the other one is below that $50,000 threshold. So they're filing, right, this 990 e-postcard. So when we talk about transparency within the nonprofit sector, if you are filing the 990N e-postcard, what I would recommend is screenshotting, right? So that as soon as you file it, as soon as it gets approved and submitted, it pops up with that little certificate. Screenshot that, print it to PDF, whatever software you have available to you, and make sure that you post that, right, on your social media, on your website, because currently there's no real place for anyone to see that 990N or e-postcard, except for if they do go to the irs.gov website and get on the TEOS, which stands for the Tax Exempt Organizational Search, they will be able to see that you filed it, but they won't be able to see that. So when we talk about public transparency within the nonprofit sector and space, that's one of the best things that you can do in terms of a 990N. So I always recommend to nonprofit leaders who contact me and say, kind of, Melissa, what is your best practice around the 990N e-postcard? And it really varies from organization to organization. My threshold is if you're below that $25,000, continue to file that 990 and or e-postcard. However, if you have a very robust strategic plan and or future goals for the organization, we know we want to move the needle, we know we want to expand programs, project services, and activities, go ahead and jump up to that 990 EZ, because it's just going to allow more information, more public transparency, therefore more public trust. And I think what you're going to find and what you're going to see is this return on investment for the organization. And you're going to see that more donors are going to pay attention to you, give you money. That also includes funders as well. And so when I say funders, you'll hear me say that term a lot in the hour that we're together today, and then also next Thursday as well. Funders, Melissa's definition of funders includes foundations and then also corporate sponsors as well. So we'll talk about donors, corporate sponsors, and funders, kind of what they're looking at and for on the 990 filings as well. So for today's presentation and then also next Thursday's presentation, we will mainly be focusing on the long form 990. However, at any point in time, though, if you all have questions, I would encourage you to type those in. I do know that kind of behind the scenes here, our tax 990 team is working diligently. They'll kind of pop up those questions. I'm not a presenter that likes to have questions held to the end, because I think one question can spark another question and just feed off of that as well. So if you're currently filing a 990 EZ, there are some similarities with the long form 990. So if those particular questions come up in today's presentation, please don't hesitate to ask those as well. So jumping into the 990 EZ, you can see here those gross receipts are less than 200,000, assets are less than 500,000. And then the long form 990, these are organizations that generally must file this if the gross receipts, right, are at least 200,000 and total assets are at least 500,000 as well. However, right, so that's kind of what you can see here on the screen. There are certain organization specific rules that apply as well here to that long form 990. So I would encourage you to jump on the irs.gov website if you have questions about that. Each one of these filings has their own instructions PDF, so it's also known as the 990I instructions as well, and that can walk you through some of those questions. However, again, if you have any questions as we go throughout today's webinar or next week's webinar, don't hesitate to ask me. If I don't know the answer, I promise you I will find out the answer for you. So then we get into a 990 T as in Tom. Many nonprofit leaders I find have never heard of the 990 T as in Tom. It's become very popular since about 2015 in this country, when kind of we saw this surgence of social enterprises or for-profits inside of nonprofit organizations. So nonprofit organizations, what they will do is they will create a for-profit to help generate revenue. Then what that does is sustain our tax exempt activities according to the IRS. So all of those programs, project services, and activities that further our mission and or our purpose statement for the organization. So as you can see here, according to the IRS statute, any nonprofit organization that brings in over $1,000 or more in unrelated business income tax, you've probably heard accountants, auditors, CPAs talk about UBIT. That's what that stands for, as unrelated business income tax. So in addition to a 990 EZ and or a long form 990, you will have to also file a 990 T. So the case study that we will be starting out with today, they do have a 990 T attached to the long form 990. So after the webinar, you will have access to those handouts, and then you can kind of scroll through that 990T. I will briefly go over that 990T next week in part 2, when we kind of really take a granular look or a deep dive into the long form 990 and the specific sections that I'm going to identify as very important for those donors and funders in today's webinar. And then, of course, private foundations. So for those of you that are on today's webinar that are just as passionate as I am about fundraising and grant writing, you have probably reviewed a 990 PF. I highly recommend nonprofit organizations. If you are seeking funding from a foundation, go to Candid, go to Charity Navigator, go to their website or the tax exempt organizational search and pull off their 990. They are required to list in their 990 all of the nonprofit organizations that they have given money to. This really then gives you an idea of who they're funding and why. So if you're not familiar with the organizations, you can go off and search those specific, nonprofit organizations, their purpose, their mission. Is it closely related to your purpose, your mission? And then also it gives you an idea of within the range, right? So a lot of times foundations are going to say this grant we will fund, between, let's say, $20,000 to $50,000. It's also going to kind of give you that average gift that they give to nonprofit organizations as well. You can also find a lot of information on this foundation. And real quickly, everybody, how I also utilize the 990 PF is looking at their board of directors of the foundation. And if I'm involved in a nonprofit organization, I'm going to then send that list to our board. Is there anybody here that right? Now, they're not going to be able to guarantee a gift. So I'm sorry, that won't happen because of obviously conflict of interest here. One of the main questions that I love. So let's say Sam Smith sits on our board, knows Sally Farmer, who sits on the foundation board. Sam is going to reach out to Sally and say, hey, Sally, our organization, I'm a board member of, we're looking to apply to your foundation for this grant. Could you, and this is the number one question that I ask all foundations, even foundation program directors, what's the number one mistake that you see nonprofit organizations make when they apply to your foundation? And have that board member at the ready to take notes. And we are going to make sure that when we apply for that foundation, we don't make that same. Absolutely. Okay, so a question here. We are a private charity filing, a 990 PF. Many donors do not consider as qualifying charities. Why? Oh, they don't consider you as a qualifying charity. Why? That's very interesting. They should. So I might need a little bit more context here, Danny, in your question. So is this in terms of actual foundations? So when you're applying for funding, they're considering you not as qualifying. And I'm wondering if maybe that's within the foundation charter. I'm not sure why donors wouldn't consider you as qualifying for those donations. I may need a little bit more context there on that one to answer that. Okay. Okay, so yeah, let's see, we are a 501c. Last year, we grossed over 200,000 in receipts, but hold assets. Are we required to file the Form 990? Yes, absolutely. So every 501c3 nonprofit organization in this country has to file some type of 990. So this changed in 2008 with the major redesign of the 990. So the Financial Accounting Standards Board had this in public comment phase for 2 years before all of these changes took place. Prior to that, if you were what the IRS considered a small nonprofit organization, you did not have to file anything in this country prior to 2008. So what you're seeing on the screen here is all of the changes that were made in accordance to the Financial Accounting Standards Board and the 990. So kind of those gross receipt thresholds came up to that 990 in e-postcard. If you do not file a 990 for 3 consecutive years in this country, you are automatically dissolved by the IRS. So making sure, yes. So I think the question was there, should we be filing then a long form 990? But your assets actually are less than that $500,000, but you grossed over 200,000. So yes, that long form 990, and that's actually what I would recommend for you as well. The long form 990, of course, is the longest, most robust, in detail, in depth 990 form that we have for nonprofit organizations. And it really helps to boost the credibility and the reputation, and then also the trust of your nonprofit organization as well. So great question. Thank you. Keep those questions coming. I love it. So I mentioned the 3 places that donors and funders, and even yourselves as nonprofit leaders. So if you're listening today's webinar and you're a nonprofit leader yourself, I hope you've done this. If not, I highly encourage you to put this on your to-do list, on your action list, your monday.com, whatever workflow you use as a priority. Candid.org. So you can actually go on and see how your nonprofit organization is portrayed. And what happens with Candid is they pull in the 990s from the IRS.gov. And I believe that just happened. That should have just happened at the end of July. So you'll be able to go in there and see your latest 990 that you just filed. It will appear there if you are on the calendar year. So you follow the calendar year as your fiscal year. So your 990 would have been due then May the 15th. So that should have pulled that in, and then you can upload things as well. So let's say worst case scenario, if you ever had to amend a 990, you can upload the amended 990 before then that next batch, in which Candid then pulls from the IRS.gov website. Same thing is true for Charity Navigator. So Charity Navigator, you can go and claim your business. So it's very similar to corporate America, everybody, in terms of claiming your business, like on Yahoo, Yelp, Google, Maps, whatever the case may be. And there's a tool that you can go through that asks you questions such as your impact of your programs, projects, services, and activities. So you can go into more in depth than what we're going to see actually on page 2, part 3, program service accomplishments on the 990 Easy and the long form 990. So that's how you get your rating, right? So with Charity Navigator, you can go up from it's silver, bronze, silver, gold, and platinum. So that's how you get that exclusive platinum rating, is you have to go in, claim that, and then answer questions. And there's also then questions about how well your nonprofit organization is governed as well. And I've been in some webinars and I have presented at some conferences where nonprofit leaders was like, well, I just don't know if that's worth our time. I would strongly say, yes, it is worth your time, because Candid reports their latest statistics that they have 12,000 to 17,000 visitors every single day. So when I talk to nonprofit leaders and I say, if you don't think that people are going and doing their homework and their research on your nonprofit organization and they're pulling off your 990, I think you're mistaken. And Charity Navigator is at 15,000 visits per day in their latest statistics that they released as well. And I feel that that is the reason, because Charity Navigator often quotes Candid in their education to donors, and then also all of the publications and articles that they put out as well. So they have not been able to track, though, I think successfully, how many 990s are downloaded. But I don't think we're seeing in this era of, electronics, so to speak, and everything being on clouds, I don't think we're seeing as many downloads. I think a lot of donors, potential donors and donors alike, are going and just viewing that right on your page on Candid and or Charity Navigator. The third one that I mentioned was on the IRS.gov website. This is the TEOS, the Tax Exempt Organizational Search. To my knowledge, and I have not been able to find this, they do not keep the statistics there. They actually just released the Tax Exempt Organizational Search in the fall of 2020. This was kind of their first debut of educational things for donors and nonprofit organizations alike. And that's when they also launched the educational videos on the IRS.gov YouTube channel as well, for then for nonprofit organizations to go and learn a little bit more about how to stay compliant, how to make sure that your status is current with the IRS Charities Division as well. Okay. That is a great question, Douglas. Does Charity Navigator rate 501c7 nonprofit clubs? I do know that they do rate 501c4s and 501c6s. I have seen a couple of also veterans organizations, 501c17s and 19s on there. They have filed kind of the long form. So definitely taking a look at if you have your EIN number, it's very easy, and or your official name that appears on your IRS determination letter. You can go off to Charity Navigator and Candid and then search for your organization as well. What I find a lot of the confusion is, and is happening with the public, in addition to the 990N e-postcard, is that we have a lot of organizations, and even the case study that we're going to be looking at today, everyone, they are doing business as. So they have a DBA, and that is how they are delivering their programs, projects, services, and activities into the communities. However, their official name is not what they're using for their marketing and PR. So that gets a little confusing when donors are like, I can't find you. So the only way to make sure that that doing business as is there is to go and claim your nonprofit organization, your business on Candid and on Charity Navigator, and edit then that information as well for your nonprofit organization. Yeah. Okay, so great questions, James. So what happens when a nonprofit organization is on that list, right, to where we have been over 15 months, years with the, it depends. It depends upon how many years you've been on the list. Yeah, you cannot file the 990N e-postcard. Even if it's less than $50,000, you will have to file a 990 EZ. I've been involved in several organizations that this happened with, and then sometimes you actually have to file even the long form 1023 as well. Even the 1023 EZ is not applicable as well. So it's really specific to how long you have been on that list and how quickly you are to react to that. And then sometimes organizations have came and they've just been operating as normal, and it's been 5 years, and they actually just have to start all over again. They cannot regain that status. They have to just apply to become then another brand new nonprofit organization. I've seen that happen as well. Yeah. Great question. So let's talk about then getting a little bit more into depth here about the importance of the Form 990. So when we talk about the 990 reflects financial and operational transparency, this provides this form, a nonprofit organization, or it should provide a detailed account of your financial activities, including your revenue, your expenses, and your net assets of the organization. It's this level of transparency that we're going to be talking about in this webinar and next webinar that helps our donors, our funders, our investors, our stakeholders, whatever terminology that you use internally in your nonprofit organization, understand how our nonprofit organization, how we manage our finances, and how we allocate the resources that are given to our organization. So the 990 should offer this very clear picture of our financial health, and it should also build trust with donors, funders, regulators, right, such as the IRS, and even in all of the states across the country. In order to become a nonprofit organization, we have to incorporate in those states. So many states across the country, not only do you have to file a 990 with the IRS, you also have to file an annual report with the state as well. So when I talk about regulators, I really want to emphasize regulators at the state level and also at the federal level. And then also, it should build trust with the general public as well. Because I don't think that many nonprofit organizations realize that once you become a nonprofit organization and you receive that IRS determination letter, there is no owner. Even if you're a founder of a nonprofit organization, you are now owned by the public. You're governed by a board of directors, and we have to ensure that we are compliant with all of the regulations for the IRS, for the state, and then also with the public. So any member of the public can file an official complaint on your nonprofit organization, even if they're not a donor of the organization. And what I love about Candid and Charity Navigator, not only do they provide education for donors and funders alike, but they provide education for nonprofit leaders as well. So if you go into Candid, maybe that's one of your things to do on your to-do list now after this webinar. You go into Candid, you claim your nonprofit organization's business, you're going to automatically be signed up for their email newsletter. And so it's kind of a little educational thing that comes out once a week. And their latest one this week, the independent sector research study was released, this annual report in July, so last month. And I use the independent sector research study, everybody, so many times throughout the year, at least monthly, if sometimes not even weekly, particularly when you're doing grant writing. This is a really wonderful, credible source for nonprofit leaders and fundraisers alike. And we also use it on Schedule O of the 990 for citations of footnotes. So if you're like, I hear what you're saying, and maybe I've heard this before, let me give you one concrete example of how I use independent sector research study. And you'll see this actually on the 990 next week when we look at a 990 that has this level of transparency. And so on Schedule O, what we're going to do is we're going to put a footnote for the volunteer hours that appear on Part 1 of the summary of the 990. So on the long form 990, we have to answer the question, how many volunteers did you have throughout the year that you're filing this 990 for that fiscal year? The independent sector research study is the one that values volunteer hours in this country. And so I think I might be getting this backwards, everybody. And so if I do, I apologize, but you can really quickly Google and correct me. The latest statistics, and I think it's for 2025. I know that they forecasted 2026, but for 2025, we are looking at $36.35 per hour for volunteer time. Now, you can, again, take a deep dive and get more of a granular level in dissecting that report for your region of the country, wherever you're joining us from, your state, but that is a national average. And because the independent sector research study is so widely known, it carries that level of transparency and credibility. So one of the things, though, the annual report they publish is on trust in nonprofit organizations and philanthropy. And a major finding, and one of the things that I thought was so interesting and so vitally important for today's webinar, is they found that nearly 3/4 of Americans say that their trust increases when nonprofit organizations are transparent about how they use their funds and where the money comes from. So my real message to you today and next week when we convene for part 2 of this webinar is keep telling your story. And one of the most important, impactful ways that you can tell your story is through your Form 990. So not just once, right, but over and over. What we really need to do as nonprofit leaders in the nonprofit sector is help people see the value in what you do, how you improve the communities in which you serve, how you improve quality of life, whether it's for humans, whether it's for animals, whatever you do and bring to the table, help them see the value in investing in you. And then also what we need to do is make sure that we are touting that return on investment. So when you give to our nonprofit organization, this is the impact. This is the impact that we have in the communities in which we serve. So that kind of leads us, let's see. I just checked only rates. Thank you, Douglas. Only rates 501c3s. You are both listed on Candid and Charity Navigator. Is there advantage to registering with them as a 501c7? That's a great question. So I would say an advantage would be is if you are really trying to scale the organization and you are looking at expanding programs, projects, services, and activities, and that you are going to, let's say, purchase a mailing list and or an email list and sending that out to a lot more donors than you normally would. Or if you're going to go on a active grant writing campaign, we do know that there are foundations out there that do fund 501c7s in addition to 501c3s. It depends upon their bylaws and how that foundation is set up. However, though, with corporate sponsors as well, we have a lot of 501c4s, 6s, and 7s get a lot of money from corporate sponsorships. So if that is possible, I would highly recommend that, because again, like I said, Charity Navigator themselves, they've done such a great job of rolling out that marketing and advertising campaign since 2020. And donors really have kind of taken that to heart. I've seen several of the newest questions on the Charity Navigator checklist already come into play with many of the organizations I'm involved in. So definitely something to look at and talk to your team about, particularly your finance team and your fundraising team internally. However, if you are looking at doing a lot of fundraising, I would recommend that. Thank you. So when we talk about the importance of the Form 990 in demonstrating accountability and impact for the organization, the 990 requires us as nonprofit organizations to report our mission. And a lot of times, it's really interesting, I see 990 forms that have no mission, or they have 3 words there for their mission. Your mission is who you are, why you're doing this, and why you got started in the first place, and for whom. So this is your brand. We need to make sure on our 990 that not just on page 1, also on page 2, part 3, that our mission statement is clearly articulated there. We also need to make sure that our significant activities, so our programs, projects, and activities that are there that have an impact. And I'll talk a little bit more about that in terms of what the IRS calls program accomplishments. So if you kind of read, if you've brought a 990 with you today, everybody, you can certainly follow along with me when I reference page numbers and parts within the Form 990. But if you have a long Form 990 in front of you, you can simply flip to page 2, part 3, program service accomplishments. If you look at number 4 there, it tells you basically how to fill out 4A, 4B, 4C, and 4D. And a lot of times what I see is that's not filled out, and or the only thing that we've done is we've put a program there and we describe the program. What we have to keep in mind is the Form 990 was designed for impact. Okay, great. If we've done a great job of delivering the programs, if we've done a great job of marketing and advertising the program, everybody already knows what that program is. What is the impact of that program is having in the communities in which we serve for the organization? The accountability part of this, in the second important part of the Form 990, is where we see on page 6, section B. And this is where we get into the governance practices, where we get into what the IRS and the Financial Accounting Standards Board calls the Sarbanes-Oxley Act. So here's where we see the executive team compensation policy, making sure that the organization has that. Then that's followed up with a footnote on Schedule O to state absolutely we are using comparables to ensure that our executive director, our CEO, our president, whatever terminology you use internally to your nonprofit organization, has, right, comparables, and that we are using comparables as well. And then also making sure that we operate ethically and effectively. So here on page 6, section B, here's where we're going to get into a little bit more in detail of the policies. So the conflict of interest policy, the whistleblower policy, and the record and retention policy as well. And everybody, one of the probably most falsified questions that exist on a federal document today appears on that page as well. So question 11, did the board review the 990 before it was filed? And a lot of times what I find is that that question is marked yes. And then when a funder or a donor starts questioning, I thought you had federal funding, but I only see contributions at the donor level here. It becomes very evident and very clear that no one really reviewed the 990 before it was filed with the IRS. So making sure that we can answer all of those questions openly and honestly, and if we do not have the policies in place, making sure that we get those policies in place sooner rather than later. Because again, part of the redesign of the 990 in 2008 put all of those governance policies in terms of Sarbanes-Oxley. And so we're seeing a lot of foundations utilizing that page to discern if you are a well-governed nonprofit organization and if you're worthy of receiving those dollars from that foundation as well. So one of the things that I want to just talk about here as well in terms of the board, and we'll talk about the board as the governing body when we get to page 7 of the long form 990, where we have to list all of our board members and how many hours. And I commonly get the question asked from nonprofit leaders around why do we have to have boards, Melissa? Explain this to me. So the federal government requires us to have boards of directors in order to do two things. Number one, that the board upholds our mission and purpose statement. So whatever we listed on the 1023 form as the reason why we are applying for tax exempt status. And then also to make sure that we do this in an ethical and accountable fashion for the organization. So our boards must be involved with the governance, with all of these policies, and then also ensuring that the Form 990 is filed on time and it is filed in an ethical and accountable fashion as well. So we're building then that trust in the communities we serve and then among the public also. So then when we talk about influences public perception and donor trust, the 990 plays a very crucial role in shaping that public perception. So our credibility, right, for the organization, and just further, it should further enhance our reputation of everybody. If you are here attending this as a nonprofit organization leader, if you are here attending this as a nonprofit board of director, I can assure you your nonprofit organization does great work. And so we really need to start showcasing that great work on the Form 990. So this needs to be showcased to those potential donors, to our existing donors, to encourage them to continue giving to our nonprofit organization, to foundations, grant makers, corporate sponsors as well. So that's really what a well-prepared Form 990 should be doing, is demonstrating, right, your prudent financial management. And also it should showcase your strong commitment to your mission of the organization as well. Okay. So our case study that we're going to be following for the rest of the time that we have here together today, I want to talk about this organization just briefly here. So the organization that we're going to be taking a look at is Dream. So they actually do business as Dream. When they were first founded in 1991, they were known as Harlem RBI. They have worked since 1991 to level the playing field for all children. What they really wanted to be able to do, this group of volunteers that got together and created this organization, was to help them become lifelong learners who really were equipped to fulfill the vision of success inside and outside of the classroom. So in 1991, when this group of volunteers got together, they focused on this one lot in Harlem, New York. So they transformed this abandoned, garbage-strewn lot into 2 baseball diamonds. And this was located actually in East Harlem. The New York Times at that time actually called this lot the worst block in New York City. But really what they, again, wanted to do was create this safe space for kids for this after school program because they felt that they deserved a safe place to be able to play. And then what they realized then was transitioning and or translating, right, those lessons that's learned in school into sports and then also into real life as well. They realized that they needed more time with these kids than just after school. So then this grew since 1991 into this large after school program and then a summer program. So for those of you who are on today's presentation, you have nieces, nephews, children, grandchildren, whatever the case may be, neighbors next door, that summer learning loss, they wanted to be able to prevent that as well for these students. Then it transitioned into schools all across New York City. So what they soon found out from doing this was that the out of school time just wasn't enough to continue to do the work to ensure that these children had, right, the vision and then the equipment and the tools for success for the future. So the reason that I choose this case study, and I have followed this nonprofit organization for many years, and I have used their annual reports, their audited financial statements, and their 990s as a case study, is because they have what is known as one of the best annual reports, or what I call an impact report for a nonprofit organization. They have won for multiple years running in this country the annual report award. And you're about to see why in just a few moments. So in the last remaining few minutes that we have here, I'm going to talk about this annual report exudes the 5 essential elements of what I consider a great annual report. So we don't just talk about our programs, projects, services, and activities. They talk about their impact. They talk about their statistic. They talk about why these programs matter. You'll see when we scroll through here, there's multiple places of real people telling the real story of the great work that this organization does. So all different methods of storytelling you'll see in this annual report. And then they have a little snippet of the financials. So a lot of times when I see annual reports and I talk to nonprofit organizations around annual reports and impact reports, you see the financials. They've either screenshotted maybe a section of the 990 or screenshotted a section of an Excel worksheet and then pasted it into the impact report or annual report. We need to get a little bit more creative because I guarantee you I'm probably in the minority, even with you all attending. I do get excited when I get an email and there's an Excel spreadsheet attached, but I'm, again, in the minority. There's very few of us like that. So what we want to do is we want color, we want a pie chart, we want a bar graph to really help people wrap their head around not just our impact, but how we are a great steward of the money that is given to this nonprofit organization. I can't say enough about thanks and thank yous. My whole philosophy since I've been doing fundraising for now over 3 decades has been gratitude will sustain. And that is proven time and time again. So we want to make sure that there's ample opportunity to say thank you and express our gratitude for donors, existing funders, and potential ones as well. And then the annual report needs to also have at least one call to action. And I talk about this on Schedule O of the 990 as well. And I will really get into detail next week when we get into the 990 Schedule O, is utilizing calls to action there as well, because that is one of the most important sections that the Charity Navigator checklist directs people to. I've already mentioned the first one, which was page 2, part 3, program service accomplishments. And then the next major section would be page 6, section B, the governance section. And then the next major section is going to be Schedule O. And I see a lot of nonprofit organizations that are filing a 990 easy and long form 990 that do not have Schedule O attached. I'm not sure how that happens. I know it doesn't happen with Tax 990 software because it's included. I'm not really sure how that is happening, but making sure, again, that we review that 990 before it is filed. Okay. Oh, fantastic. So Douglas, the question, where do we file annual reports? There is specific sections in there. So once you sign on and claim that, it takes typically about 24 hours for them to send you a confirmation email for you to then verify. Sometimes you even have to upload a letter stating on your official nonprofit letterhead your organization. And then you'll be able to see, once you kind of go through there, the different attachments, and they'll have one with an annual report. And if you already have one from your annual meeting with slides, that's perfect, Douglas. You should just be able then to PDF that. Or if you use Canva, you can put that into Canva. I'm just using Canva, everybody, because that's typically free for nonprofit organizations. There's many softwares out there. And ask for it to do a one-page kind of infographic. Even for your organization. That's really a great one-time annual report for nonprofit organizations. So yes, that would be fantastic. Thank you for that question. That was a great one. All right, everybody. So I'm going to pull up then Dream's annual report and the last remaining 8 minutes that we have here together. So that way we can just kind of scroll through this. This is actually on their website as well. So you can kind of see the shortened URL here. 2023.wearedream.org. So you will be able to reference back to this. And that's going to become important next week in the webinar, because you will see how easily we can also integrate that shortened URL into the 990 in those specific sections that we've already talked about today. So I love how this is very innovative here and integrative. It kind of flows through, as you can see here. So we are Dream, right? So we talk about then the field of dreams here. And it kind of highlights each place where we are involved in delivering programs, projects, services, and activities of the organization. And then their model. This is going to be important as well. And I'll reference back to this next week when we come back together. They have 4 pillars here, and they use the 4 different colors to represent those 4 pillars, meaning those programs, projects, services, and activities in which they deliver. So you can see here, it's going to highlight all 4 of these as we kind of go through, and then it pops up. Very interactive. I love this. Lots of colors here. Wonderful pictures. And I love how this comes in. Our community and our impact right here. And then you can see the statistics. And then even comparing Dream to New York State test results as well. And then the class of 2023. And why this is important and why we're using 2023 is that is the latest 990 that we'll be taking a look at of theirs next week as well when we continue the webinar. So a little bit of storytelling here. So you can actually read, right, some of the students' stories here. And then alumni spotlight. And ta-da, the financials. So very colorful. You can really get a sense of where this organization is financially. A comparison here of the last 5 years worth of data. And then also what I love here is probably one of the few organizations I've been touting live living donor walls in fundraising courses that I've been teaching since 2005. I love this. For those of you who've ever delivered those paper copies, if you make a mistake, it's virtually impossible to correct that. Here, if you make a mistake on misspelling someone's name, you can certainly profusely apologize and log in and see that. What I love about here is the anonymous. So if you have given at that level, you know who you are, we are still honoring you in accordance to those donor wishes. We also have a supporter spotlight as well. And then here's where we see the first embedded video story as well of the organization. And then last but not least is a call to action. So as you can see here with this organization, there are 4 calls to action here, 5 if you include the stay in touch, and the donate now. And the other thing that I would mention on this one, as we were kind of scrolling through, notice at the top that this anchor banner never goes away. So we always have the brand, we always have the donate now here as well. So bringing this then together for the 990 and setting up next week's presentation on when we really get into the audited financial statements and including the 990 is what I find is nonprofit organizations spend a lot of time and money on annual reports and impact reports such as this one. This one, though, unless you go to their website, this is not as widely available as a 990. And annual reports and impact reports also are not the most commonly used documents that exist today for nonprofit organizations in discerning whether it's a well-governed nonprofit organization and how they steward the money. That is still the 990 form. So the 990 form is the most commonly used document in the United States for establishing credibility among all nonprofit organizations. So when we come back together next week for part 2, how to take this 990 and this impact report and integrate sections of this into the 990 where we're telling our full financial story, where not only can we use this annual report and or impact report, we can also then utilize our 990 as that fundraising, PR, and marketing tool as well. And I know we have 2 minutes remaining here, everybody, so I want to be a good steward of everybody's time. Any final questions for the conclusion of today's webinar? Any questions you hope that we will cover next week in part 2 of the webinar? Any comments about the impact report? I would love to know what you thought about the impact report. All right, let's see. Stephen asked, we are a private foundation filing a 990 PF, but some donors will not fund us since we are not a public charity. Why? I'm not sure why. That's an interesting question. I would like to have a little bit more context. I wonder, have they provided any reason as to why they would not be funding? Because we know that a lot of private foundations, I mean, they are set up by individual donors. We also have private foundations that are allowed to do programs, projects, services, and activities, so conduct those in the communities in which they serve as well. I'm wondering, Stephen, I hope that you're going to be back next week for part 2 of the webinar, to where maybe when we put on there on the 990 Schedule O, and then also on page 2, part 3, when we talk about donors as well, then we can, maybe there's a specific expenditure, I'm assuming expenditure responsibility. I'm wondering, is that in, has somebody asked you about then page 10 of the 990, functional classification of expenses? I would be curious. At the end of next week's webinar, you will get my contact information, everybody. I wonder if that's a specific thing, Stephen, if you want to reach out to me, and we might have to have an offline conversation about that. But I would be more than happy to get a little bit more granular on that one. I've not heard of that. So yeah. Oh, thanks, Mark. Absolutely. Yeah, I've found a lot of organizations kind of use that as a guide as well, because they have won those awards. Yes, and I will showcase another annual report as well for an organization that's not as large as this one, obviously, so you can kind of see some of those same points as well. Oh, fantastic. Yes, as a nonprofit athletic club. Yes, good. Definitely help you with attracting corporate sponsors, because you could easily see, even with corporate sponsors putting their logo on this annual report and the impact report as well as sponsors, and encouraging. Then when you do that, it encourages others to give as well. So kind of that shout out of, we have Wells Fargo as a sponsor of our organization, as a corporate sponsor. Yes. Great, everyone. Everyone, we are right now at 3:01. I'm going to stay on until the last person signs off. So if you have any final questions, we're here. Ashley's just rejoined. So any questions about Tax 990 or anything that we've covered today, would be more than happy. And I hope to see you again next week.
And I see we have a question here for Tax 990. Tax 990, does Tax 990 software have previous years or just the current year? Tax 990 actually supports the current year and 2 years prior. So 2025, 2024, and 2023. And thank you all for joining us today. A special thank you to Melissa Leroy for sharing your knowledge and experience with us. We truly appreciate you taking the time to help our nonprofit community better understand Form 990 for fundraising and PR. We hope you found today's session valuable and that you leave with confidence filing your next Form 990. Be sure to join us for the next webinar in this series as we continue building on today's discussion. This session will be August 13th at 2 p.m. Eastern Standard Time. Thank you again for being here, and we look forward to seeing you at our next session. Have a wonderful day.